first time I noticed him was on a busy subway ride home from work. He was standing at the other end of the car, staring directly at me. I didn't think much of it at first. Public transit is a melting pot of odd glances and weary travelers. However, when I disembarked, a chill ran down my spine as I saw him following me onto the platform. Initially, I told myself it was coincidence. The city is a crowded maze of busy souls after all. But as the days slipped into a week, I began to see him everywhere. On the subway, outside my office building, in the cafe where I grabbed my morning coffee. His presence became a daily dread festering at the back of my mind. I thought about confronting him but hesitated every time. There was something palpably menacing in his gaze, something that whispered of darker intentions. My friends told me I was being paranoid, probably overworked and overtired. Yet the fear didn't subside, it only grew, nourished by every unblinking, unyielding stare he directed at me. So, I did what I thought was best. I changed my routine. I took different routes, altered my schedule, avoided the places I thought he might expect me to be. For a few days it seemed to work. I felt a fleeting sense of triumph, thinking I had outsmarted him. But that relief was soon shattered. It was late one evening, and I'd stayed at the office longer than usual. The streets were quieter, save for the soft hum of the city. As I walked the familiar path home, enjoying the rare calm, I heard footsteps echoing behind me. Quickening my pace, I stole a glance over my shoulder. It was him, closer than ever before, his eyes gleaming with a predatory glint. Panic surged through me, propelling me into a run. I darted through the dimly lit streets, my breath harsh in my ears, the footsteps behind me keeping pace. I aimed for a crowded area, thinking safety lay in numbers, but the night had drawn most indoors. As I rounded a corner, I collided with a figure. My heart stopped, fearing the worst, but it was just a late-night shopper. I frantically explained that someone was following me, and with a mixture of concern and confusion, they agreed to stay with me until I could call a cab. Back in my apartment, the walls felt too thin, the shadows too deep. I reported him to the police the next morning. They took my statement but warned me that without more to go on, there wasn't much they could do. I felt my control slipping, every ounce of my being screaming that I was being hunted. Days turned into weeks, and each instance of seeing him watered the seeds of dread within me. Then came the night that sealed my terror. Lying in bed, I awakened to the faint sound of something moving in my living room. Heart thumping against my rib cage, I listened. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and calculated, crept towards my bedroom. I reached for my phone, only to find it wasn't by the bedside where I always left it. Locked in my bedroom with no way to call for help, I moved silently toward the door, just as the handle began to turn. Adrenaline surged, and I pressed my weight against the wood, holding it shut with all my strength. The force from the other side paused, and for a moment, silence. That's when the real terror set in. I realized that this was no random occurrence, no simple case of wrong place at the wrong time. He had planned this. He was relishing the fear, feeding off the power he held in this game of cat and mouse. Police sirens eventually wailed in the distance, a sound that has never been so welcome. He must have heard them too, for the pressure against the door ceased. When the police arrived, they found the back door ajar, but no sign of him. They scoured the area, yet it was as if he had vanished into the night itself. Since that night, I've moved cities, changed my job, and started anew. But the deeper horror lies in the waiting, in the fear of seeing his face again. because I know he's still out there. And the question isn't if he will find me, it's when. I thought I knew the rhythm of the city, its ceaseless din, the ebb and flow of traffic, the steady pulse of urban life. But that was before I noticed the pacing figure amidst the shadows of my daily walk home. The first time was unremarkable, a mere flicker in the corner of my vision, so slight I chided myself for being paranoid. Yet as the days slipped into nights, the flicker morphed into a persistent silhouette trailing behind me. Initially, it was the same route, 15 minutes from the office to my apartment, walking briskly through crowded sidewalks, ducking into convenience stores, thrust amidst strangers. But there, in the throng, was where I felt his eyes, a gaze tangible and burning. Every look over my shoulder confirmed the dread growing inside me. He was there, a specter clothed in nondescript attire, his face obscured by his collar or a passing bus. With each encounter, his proximity grew closer, not merely physically, but into the recesses of my life. I tried to lose him, navigating through mazes of alleyways or abruptly changing my path. Yet he adapted with an eerie prescience. Panic set in one night when I sprinted across a nearly empty plaza, throwing caution to the wind. He matched my pace until the lights of a 24-hour diner bathed me in safety. Yet even there, through the window, I saw him stop, his head turning slowly, as if marking my refuge. Sleep became elusive, shadowed by the fear that this stalker could escalate his pursuit. Images of my earlier brushes with him played on repeat, how he had appeared at my favorite coffee spot, mere tables away, pretending to read a newspaper that barely masked his surveilling eyes. At work, my concentration shattered, every exiting thought replaced with nervous glances toward windows and doors, expecting to see his ominous figure. Driven by a mixture of fear and desperation, I guarded my routines, altering anything that might make me predictable. I started taking cabs, then buses, in random sequences, believing that losing him in the city's arteries might finally grant me respite. It worked momentarily. The sightings dwindled, and life's semblance of normalcy began to weave itself back together, fragile and tentative. Perhaps he sensed my relaxation, for it didn't last. One unnaturally silent night, my phone erupted into life, a startling jangle that echoed ominously through my sparse apartment. Unknown number, I answered tentatively, only to be met with harsh, deliberate breathing. My hellos dissolved into the static before a sharp click severed the call. Shaken, I peered out into the night from behind securely locked doors. The street below was deserted, bathed in the harsh glow of streetlights. No sign of him. Still, the fear had rooted itself deep within, growing with each creak of my building, with shadows that twisted into menacing shapes. The police were understanding yet helpless without more to go on. They advised caution and a record of any strange happenings. My own vigilance intensified. I was a prisoner of my fear, ensnared by the gaze of a man whose motives lay cloaked in shadow. He called again, days later, the same chilling silence on the line. It was then I understood his message was not in the words but in the control, the power he wielded though we'd never spoken. My life was no longer my own. It was a series of reactions to his haunting presence. Resolution seemed a distant concept, elusive and taunting. I couldn't endlessly run. The city, once a sprawling haven, had shrunk to corridors of fear marked by his possible presence. Friends noticed my frazzled nerves, watched as I jumped at benign touches or glances. I confided in a few, saw the dawning horror in their eyes as they processed my living nightmare. But the solution came unpredictably, spawned from sheer exhaustion and despair during yet another restless night. If I couldn't escape him physically, I could confront him, face the enigma head-on. Trembling with a mix of fear and resolve, I set out at the usual time, my heart a drumbeat loud against the silence of my preparations. Halfway to safety as expected, the figure detached itself from the gloom, his steps a soft echo of mine. Adrenaline lent me courage. I stopped and turned, my voice steady though my body shook. "Why are you following me?" The silence that followed was suffocating, his figure still shrouded. And then, with a tilt of his head, he stepped into the light, his features ordinary yet unreadable. "I thought you knew," he said, his voice eerily calm, devoid of emotion or sanity. "You are my project. I watch because I must, because your reactions, your fear, they are necessary." The horror of his words was like a physical blow, chilling me to the core. This wasn't random. It was targeted and planned with precision. I was his subject, a pawn in a twisted game of psychological terror. His smirk was the final detail, a confirmation of the nightmare. His footsteps receded into the night as I stood frozen. The resolution I had sought was a revelation too ghastly to process. I was left haunted, knowing that the eyes which tracked me were not bound by mere interest, but driven by an unhinged need to see my terror unfold. Back home, the locks barely kept the terror at bay. The city outside morphed into a labyrinth, each street echoing with the steps of my constant follower, each shadow a cloak for his watching eyes. The sense of being hunted lingered, a ghostly presence in a once safe sanctuary, now nothing more than a stage for my fear, spotlighted for his twisted satisfaction. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the city's horizon, casting long shadows between the high rises, I'd feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. It started subtly, almost imperceptible at first, like the faintest whisper of wind. But as days turned into weeks, the feeling grew stronger, more persistent, as if someone's gaze was boring into my back. I tried to dismiss it as city life paranoia, a common side effect of living alone in a bustling urban sprawl. I decided to take my usual shortcut through a quieter, less traveled alley. That's when I heard it, footsteps echoing behind me, mirroring my pace. Quickening my walk, I stole a glance over my shoulder. No more than a few paces behind was a dark figure, hood pulled over their head, face obscured. Panic surged through my veins as I broke into a run, the footsteps behind me keeping pace. Bursting out onto the bustling street, I dared another look back. The alley was empty, the figure gone as if they'd vanished into thin air. I chalked it up to the city's ability to conjure fears from shadows, telling myself it was nothing. I laughed it off when recounting the story to a friend over coffee the next day. They joked about ghosts and goblins stalking the streets, their laughter a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. But the relief was short-lived. That evening, as I approached my apartment, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my door. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. "I saw you run today. You're faster than I thought," it read, in stark, menacing print. No signature, no hint of identity. Just those chilling words. My heart lodged into my throat, a profound sense of violation sweeping over me. Someone was watching me, noting my movements with terrifying precision. I reported the incident to the police, but without more to go on, they advised me to change my routines and be vigilant. I followed their advice, altering my routes, varying my schedule, but the feeling of being watched never dissipated. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow that lingered too long, or the faintest echo of footsteps over my own. I felt eyes on me, always scrutinizing, unblinking. The situation escalated one Friday evening. I returned home to find my front door ajar, the lock tampered with. Heart pounding, I pushed the door open, half expecting to find someone lurking inside. But my apartment was as I left it, nothing amiss except for a new note on my kitchen table. "Changing locks won't keep me out," it taunted. Fear, raw and potent, took hold, paralyzing me momentarily. Sleep became elusive, every creak and sigh of the building a signal of impending doom. I installed multiple locks on my door, a security camera by the entrance. Still, the notes kept coming, slid under my door or left at places I frequented. Each message was more ominous than the last, detailing what I wore, conversations I had, where I had been seen. Desperation clawed at me, a need to end this nightmare. I scoured my memories, trying to pinpoint anyone who might bear such intense malice towards me. Friends, ex-partners, even distant acquaintances. My mind spun with possibilities, but no one fit the profile of my tormentor. Then, late one rainy night as I lay in bed, straining against the silence, the faint buzz of my security camera alerted me to movement outside my door. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling as I accessed the live feed. A hooded figure stood there, obscured yet unmistakably real. As they reached towards the camera, their hood slipped slightly, revealing a glimpse of a face. Recognition struck like lightning. My upstairs neighbor, someone I'd passed in the hallway with nothing more than a nod. I called the police, my voice a cocktail of fear and fury, narrating the live images. Within minutes they were there, the sound of their boots in the corridor a symphony to my ears. They apprehended the figure, who struggled, ranting about obsessions and connections fabricated in a disturbed mind. The aftermath was a blur of statements and disbelief. Questions swirled through the community. How could this have happened? Why me? The answers were less comforting. It was random, the choice on a whim, they said, as if that were meant to console. As life slowly returns to its old cadence, the psychological scars remain. Each step outside is a reminder of the eyes that watched, the mind that plotted. Yet each day is a victory, a reclaiming of the peace that was once mine, disrupted but not destroyed by the gaze of a stalker.